Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to the Mount Gretna School of Arts Summer Lecture Series, hosted here in the Pennsylvania Chautauqua's Hall of Philosophy. It's always a great honor to be a part of the Chautauqua tradition here, and our school is always proud to share its lecture series with the community, and then have the Chautauqua share this beautiful facility with all its history and ambiance, and to now be part of that history for 12 years running. It's starting to feel a little bit like home. And I want to thank Stinson Strout for his support of the lecture series this summer, and Purpose One, our corporate sponsor, Dan Liberatore, who always steps in when I need him with some financial assistance. And I will say that I can't say enough about JD. I really like him. He's fun fact about JD is his grandfather, or great uncle, was the first person to take one of these summer cottages and heat it so that it could be lived in year round. So he remembers coming up with his family and extended family to not only fill that cottage, but rent some other ones nearby. And so that connection with Mount Gretna goes old Lidditz family, right? You know, back to Dan. Dan had to step aside during the pandemic, and I'm gonna go on and on, JD. I'll keep it moving. And JD stepped in as board president, and it's been wonderful. I will say the man has single-handedly brought in over probably $750,000 to $800,000 of the school's funding through his philanthropic connections. It's founding, which I know is probably an understatement, but he's always working, and every time we have a fundraiser or an online thing, he's chipping in and offering encouragement, even when you were helping your mother through her end of life care. He was a steady support for me during the pandemic as board president, and just can't say enough. Thank you. Now, JD, the artist, who also, you know, he's one of the first persons that helped encourage me to start the school and reach out to people here in Mount Gretna. A painter through Lancaster Galleries family, who also supports the school. I'm going to introduce JD now more formally. All the sentimental stuff aside, he received his BFA in 1989 from Parsons in New York, where he studied with Leland Bell, John Helliker, Paul Ressica, Larry Rivers. He also studied with George Sorrells at Kutztown, and you had spent some time with Nell Blaine and at Parsons, and a bunch of people. The lecture is really Al Kresh. The lecture really jumps into all this. He did mention his studies also took him to France, Italy, Russia, Switzerland, Germany, and Italy. He was awarded the artist in residence at the Helliker Lahoten Foundation in 2009 and the Borgo Pinochetto, Tuscany, Italy, close enough, in 2012. He teaches and lectures throughout Pennsylvania and at the Aramont School. He's taught at Mount Grattan School of Art. He's teaching right now. He's represented by Lancaster Galleries and Eiselford, Maine, and Brick-Walk Fine Art, Hartford, Connecticut. He's had solo exhibits at the Lancaster Galleries of his Italy drawings, Great Cranberry Island drawings and paintings. Sort of low and Godot. All right, JD, I'm gonna wrap it up now. That's enough. But I want to say thank you again, JD, for coming. You're welcome. Happy you're here. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be here. Glad to be here. I wish I was out painting with you guys. I love even this kind of weather, being out there. Anyway, I started out with this statement from Thoreau, talking about, you know, it's not what you look at that matters, but you know it does. But also, it's how you see. How do we see when we're out there? You know, when we're in front of nature, when we're being inspired by what we see. I'm going to start my presentation with some artists that have influenced me over the years. And the first guy who ever caught my eye was Corot. You know, he's the grandfather of plein air painting. He's the one we all think about, you know, when we talk about plein air painting and how it started. You know, look at this thing. And he found this and invented his interpretation of light, space, and air when he was in Italy. And he continued to use this kind of inspiration, this kind of you know, looking at the drawing and the color. Look at this up here as it slides down, and what that does and pulls over to this gray-green over here. You know, he's not just drawing, he's using color. I remember Leland. I love that we have some folks here that knew some of my teachers. Leland Bell used to get angry because people said, oh, Corot's a tonalist painter. Leland would say, that's not tone, that's his color. It's his color. It's what we see. It's how he saw the landscape. And how was he able to move our eye around that flat surface and allow that space to be there for that it could be a quarry, you know, there with that rock formation, moving our eye, sending us through that beautiful, beautiful landscape. Look at that. That's him thinking as he's seeing. That's a drawing. That's notations. That's what first inspired him, whatever he was looking at. He put that down quickly, you know? Look at the weight of the mark making on a beautiful tree. Look how he sticks that figure down there to give us a sense of scale. And he shifts the whole drawing over to the left and gives us that sight that we can move into that church dome. It's just beautiful drawing. Beautiful drawing. Now we're going a little bit later in Corot's life. You know, he's still being inspired by nature, but he's beginning to invent a little bit more. He's using what he sees. These etchings he did like this were done on glass plates. I can't say the French term, but it is a wonderful way of drawing, basically. Those are the marks that he would make when he was looking at something. I get so excited by that sort of thing, by seeing it, you know. What was he telling us about the landscape there? Is it just about the figure in the building? Is it more about the mass of trees on the right? That value that pops underneath the mass, opens up into that field, takes us back to the mountain, lightens up in the sky and comes forward. The sky gets darker, but comes forward. Like it's coming over our heads. Okay. Oops, went too far. There we go. Now this is the you know, the culmination of the late paintings, where he uses these marvelous inventions of his, you know, these Corot, I call them Corot dots. You know, where he opens up a space that's gotten kind of dark. He uses the light of the figure on that sash, that beautiful sort of ruddy thing that happens here, you know, how that pulls apart. And look, remember that drawing of that tree? Look at this tree over here. The gesture of the trees, how they move in space, how they open the space for us. He's doing that for you and I. Of course, he did it for himself, but he's letting us see what he saw. And he's definitely here inventing some of this as well. Invention, I think, is important. Distillation might be a better word that you use, you know, after you've seen a subject, you've drawn it, you've been out there, you painted there, you come back to your studio and you begin to look. And one of the things that I love about Corot is I think he got excited about the paint itself, which is something I'm very much part of, that kind of thought, where a mark or a color can excite the surface, can open the space, can increase the tension that's in the painting. Now, I didn't put one of Constable's studies, which are beautiful. You should look at Constable's oil studies. They call them sketches. I think they're better paintings sometimes than the big ones like this. But I put this up here because this is an interesting work, very dramatic, very, very finished for a Constable. But I have it up here because I have it in relationship with, I don't know if you're familiar, you should be familiar with a fellow named Kossoff. So he's looking at Constable directly and drawing from Constable. Constable's inspired by nature, and he's making a grand painting in the studio. This guy's going and standing in front of Constable and being inspired by the painting that Constable made. And he did several drawings and etchings of that same painting. You know, I hope you always take a sketchbook to the museum. This is one of our American painters that affected me early on when I was a younger painter. But you can see an influence of Corot here. And this is George Inness when he went to Italy. You have that sense of light there too. And I just have that there because, you know, there were a whole group of Americans early on that went to Europe, and they saw Constable paintings, they saw Corot paintings, and they were influenced by it. Here he is back in America painting. That's a bold thing there, that dark, dark thing. This slide's a little dark, if you know the real painting. It's at the Metropolitan. But that bold dark in the middle ground there, you know, to allow the light in the far distance to pop open again. And that weird color under the clouds, how that holds. And again, you know, look at that line he makes with this. And again, over there where the light hits the top of that field. You know, if these things weren't here, if that wasn't there, you know, the painting would become much flatter. Wouldn't be interesting at all. You know, of course the cows are nice, but they aren't. They're sort of like Corot's figure. They're there to give us a sense of scale, I believe. Oh my God, look at this. You guys, this is you out there in the middle of these woods with all that green and all those branches and all those trunks. Look at Cezanne. Look at Cezanne doing this. You know, these watercolors, you don't see them that often. You know, museums don't put watercolors out that often because of the light problems. But you do see them sometimes. I think the Barnes has a couple of watercolors. that you could go to very quickly. But look at that. He's inspired by the landscape also, you know, and constantly working from it. But he's also doing something different. He begins to do something different as he looks. You know, he was inspired by a painter named Delacroix, especially early in his work. And the active nature of things, how the relationship of the angles and the actual brush mark comes from looking at and understanding somebody like Delacroix. But he begins to come into a more modern sense of the picture plane. You know, he's dividing the space in a new way, at least a way that has been talked about since probably Cezanne and you know, it was sort of a bridge between maybe the Cubists and the Romantic painters, you know, where he's looking at space in a very different way. He's not afraid of flattening some areas and not getting the absolute sense of space that the older guys were after, the older painters. He begins to see something new, you know, as he's looking. Look at that. Look at that. You know, when you look at that, you think about the relationships that he builds on that canvas. You know, when you see these things, these shapes that come down here, echoing again. And then it goes over here. That same arc is there, that is here. And then he puts that bold orange, you know, rock building there in the center, almost. Beautiful. Beautiful sense of tension and rhythm in that painting, you know, allowing us to see and move around that. You know, look how he creates this space right here. And then that. You know, how it holds us, how it squeezes sort of and moves back, and then all of a sudden breaks over to this over here. Just beautifully painted. Wish I could paint like that. You know, you look at that. Another one I put in because it's green. I shouldn't laugh. That's not the easiest thing, is it? Painting all that green. I had a student one time, we were out in the in the humidity in the middle of Tennessee, down in what they call a holler, which is a ravine, and a stream is down there. And this fella came over, he said, TD, he said, when we go back and I can order paint, he said, where can I find a tube of old growth green? He wanted the color to come right out of the tube. You know what it is? It's constant observation and change. And it isn't always mixing the green, but it's what you put beside it. And here the drawing is so important. Look at the drawing in this piece. Look how those arches relate to each other. And they create a diagonal, that road and bridge going back. And how bold it is to allow this to sort of come the whole way down here. You know, again, creating a new place for our eye. After all, isn't that what we do? We want someone to be able to see. We want someone to be able to look around when we paint. Not just get stuck, you know, looking at one thing. He did this again too. Do you see this? It's almost the same dimensions. Right here, and then that. I love that arc though, of that branch, the double branch that's coming down, you know, into that. So when you look at those trees and you're out there trying to paint, think about what you can use, you know, in all of that drawing that's out there in front of you, inspiring, moving. Now here's Leland Bell looking at the landscape. You don't often see Leland's paintings of landscape. There are some out there. There's a wonderful book that has some beautiful landscapes by Leland. But I thought this was an interesting one because it relates, I believe, to Cézanne. It also relates to one of Leland's favorite painters, his late paintings of Duran. But again, look how he almost uses that same, and it's not I don't think it's a crutch or a gizmo, but it's something that I'm just noticing now. Here we go, back into space. Leland's pushing us up this way. He draws, man, that guy could draw. He was a draftsman that you just stood in front of him, and it's almost like watching a sunset. Do you paint it or do you just stand in front of it? You know, his drawings were fantastic. Well, you can see it here. Look how solid this is. Look at the relationships. But it's almost like Leland said about Cézanne, it's just not drawing. It's the color he's using. Look what he's doing with green as he moves it back into space. How he changes that. How he puts this little salmon thing here, you know, that makes this green very different than the other greens. If that wasn't there, it would be, you know, I don't know. This too, that beautiful complement, you know, right there, insisting that we see it. I loved Leland Bell. He was one of my teachers. He would sit down, you'd be drawing, and Leland would come in and he'd say, "Can I sit down there?" Yeah, of course. And he'd sit in front of your work. Your work would be here and the model would be there. And Leland would sit there and go, "Look." And then he'd go, "Here, this, change it, this, there." You don't have, he'd be back and forth constantly on that, looking, you know, and you can see it in these, you can see it in the paintings. It's not a quick study. There he is. I have this in homage to him. This is a marvelous drawing. He did so many beautiful self-portraits. I'm lucky this is in my own collection. Interesting person. Stanley, wasn't he a great person and a good artist?
Yes.
Yeah, he was. He was one of the, you know, when I think back over all the things that I've seen and people that I've known, he resonates. He resonates. The work resonates. And you see here, you know, influence of Matisse, you see Cézanne, you see Hilliard, but it is definitely Leland Bell, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Creating these, and he invented these things, you know, he was looking at these shapes, you know, how do I get this, how do I get the fullness of the form? You know, how do I get the fullness of the form? Making that beautiful underside of that arm, so it has some form and volume, and that face turned slightly toward us. And these things, these beautiful things that he created, and that, you know, is a way of seeing. That's a way of seeing, of making something that is basically flat come to life. Relationships of people, you know, this is narrative, this thing. We're wondering what's going on with that butterfly. There's obviously been some turbulence there. Look how the apple, the bowl has turned. Beautiful painting. The mark making. The line, the gesture. It's just like the trees in the Corot. It's just like the trees in Cézanne. We look at all of those things and we build upon them to make a painting. To really see. This is Al Kresch, another person that I got to know well. Now Leland, go back to Leland just for a second. Leland was a musician also and talked about the rhythm of things. You know, he often would talk about syncopation, you know, as you're painting, it's not just 1, 2, 3. It's 1, 2, 3. You get that syncopation. You know, even the negative shapes between the figures, when you start looking at them, they aren't regular, but they move in a rhythmic way. They're just beautiful. And Leland got to know a lot of people that came out of Hans Hofmann because he met a lovely lady, Louisa Mathias' daughter, who was a painter also, who was a student of Hofmann. And then he became good friends with a group of painters, and this is one of them, Albert Bresch. And you can see Al here at this time was influenced by people like Illion. I should have put an Illion painting in here. But you see the line and the color and the mark making and how he begins to lead us through. You know, look at the change. The change, he just didn't find a white and thought, this is a really nice white, I'm going to use it everywhere in my painting. The white changes from here to here to here to there, and then back again, like over there. You know, it's really beautiful. Very interesting. This is a little later in his life. You still see, you know, his love of the landscape. He was born in Pennsylvania and up near Scranton, and loved going out into the countryside. Lived in New York most of his life, though. Raised a family there and things. But look at that. Look how bold that is. He simplifies forms, doesn't he? He's not recording everything he sees. He's allowing what he sees to create a painting that is somewhat simpler in a way that allows us to see it. You know, the forms are interesting, and you see that same idea I was talking about with Leland. You know, the spaces between things, here to here, right there, here to here. It's very different with that negative shape than from here to here. You know, he's really seeing it, and he's not allowing it to become mundane, or even though it's a calm painting, you know, we travel. He moves us. Beautiful work. He was influenced by Rouault also, if you know that painter, who did some beautiful work as well. Look at that orange in the foreground, how different it is than the orange in the middle ground. And is that only because he changed the orange, or is it because the complement's there? You've got that blue in there that's doing something. It's not just sitting there, it's creating a new sense of color. This is a painter, Anne Tabachnik, which some of you may not know Anne Tabachnik, but she was a Hofmann student also. I think she was in Hofmann school up in Provincetown, if I'm not mistaken. Abstract expressionists, they kind of lump her in there. She used the thinner veils of color. You know, as she looked across that you know, it could almost be a Corot. Almost. Not quite. Interesting though, isn't it? Look at that. Transparent. The figures could be trees, the trees could be figures. You know, there's a story behind it. She's using nature, but changing it in her own way. Dividing space, you know, giving us form that's transparent. That's kind of an oxymoron. You know, that's very interesting work. And again, negative shape creating a rhythm across that. Gesture creating a rhythm across. Even that white line creates a sense of horizon that's very interesting. And the way she divides that, it's a sort of a Cezanne thing. You know, when you look at Cezanne's still life, here where she raises this one and drops it down here, creating a different sense of tension here, so our eye moves in and around, and then takes us across there again. Really, an interesting painter. She was a nice person too. I think she taught at MICA at one point. Look at that. Look at that color. Look at that drawing. You know, would the color work if the drawing wasn't there or vice versa? How is she creating that sense of space? And that value change behind the sculpture. You know, could you be that bold if you were working this transparent? The drawing's very interesting too. Now this is Paul Resica. He was one of my, he's the reason I went to Parsons. I looked at a book called A Sense of Place after I had graduated. There were other reasons, but I looked at this book and there was a painting in there of Horseleech Pond, and I thought, you know what, I'd like to learn something from this guy, this painter. This is an earlier, this goes back to the 1960s for Resica. Italy. He's in Italy, you know, you can sort of see that sense of light that Corot had. He's more known for these things, these paintings. This is Provincetown. It looks like a huddle of people there in that boat, right in the middle. But bold color, bold shapes, bold mark making. He was an interesting fellow. I remember him coming up in a field. I was out painting in New Jersey, Beamerville, New Jersey, in the middle of a field by myself. I'd left everybody in. I ran away from my classmates. Was in this field and I was working on this painting, and I turned and I saw this big black figure. Resica had a black coat, a black hat on, and he's coming up the hill. And he looks and he goes, "Whistler, I see goldfish in your sky. There are goldfish in your sky." And he got so excited about that. And I thought, you know, sometimes we have to step back and look at our own work and see what we're making. I didn't see the goldfish, but he was excited. But he's about, you know, a touch and a mark. You know, some of his things are really, the final mark is left go, you know, when he does things like this. This is a little bit later. Now that's, if you notice, there's color coming through. That's probably a painting he turned upside down and repainted. You know, used the old painting as an imprimatura and allowed that color to surprise us and excite us. You know, something that we don't expect to see is already there. You have a color relationship immediately when you paint over an old painting, or if you color your canvas. This is one of the later paintings now. He's very gone back to simplifying into a sense of geometry almost. That triangle comes up in his very, very early work, and it's come back up in the late work. But even there, he does things, you know. If you really look at it, you begin to see, you know, the change of this color from here to here. How he allows that to sort of move, gives us some atmosphere. You know, that green under that orange above that blue. Very interesting sense of color. I think that whole crew loved Cezanne and Matisse. you know, and their sense of drawing and things like that. This is John Hallaker. John Edward Hallaker. He was one of my teachers also and became a friend. They all became friends. I wrote, you know, have written to them and talked with them. Now, Leland's gone and Hallaker's gone. But this is early Hallaker. I think is it dated 38 or something? Early drawing of his. He would draw often for the New Masses, which was a left-leaning, almost communist publication back in the day. He changed, didn't he? Went from that to this, you know. He was good friends with Arthur Gorky. Gorky introduced Hallaker to Cezanne. They bumped into each other at the Metropolitan in the cafeteria, I think. And Gorky said, "Have you seen the Cezannes?" And Hallaker said, "No." So they went and looked at Cezanne. And then Hallaker went into this abstract, sort of surreal period. And this is one of the later paintings. This is Cranberry Island, the rocks at Cranberry Island. You know, unexpected. You know, what is it? Is it abstract or is it real? He would draw like crazy. This guy, in the Foundation's archives, there are over, is it 600 or 700 sketchbooks? Just the sketchbooks. And then like 2,000 pieces of artwork by him. He was constantly working. But he was one of the people that would draw from nature. He would go out and walk around and draw like crazy. Probably always had a sketch pad. And he'd go back to the studio and he would invent things. They were memories for him. I remember a good friend of mine who was very close to Jack, saying they had a small gathering at his house, his apartment in New York. And she went back 2 weeks later and there was a painting of her in his apartment in New York. He had that kind of visual memory, you know, which is, I think, developed a lot by drawing, constantly looking and seeing and being familiar, you know, like Bonnard. He used to basically say he would only paint what he knew. You know, Leland used to tell the story about a gathering with Bonnard and a lady had set up the dining room table to look like one of his paintings. And said, "Monsieur Bonnard, would you paint my table?" And he looked at her and said, "Madame, I do not know your table. I don't know it. I'm not going to paint that. I know my own." Now this is Nell Blaine, who was also a Hoffman student. Hallaker was a little earlier than the Hoffman crowd, but Nell again was a friend of the Resica, Al Kresch, and Tabachnik. But this is early. This is Hoffman. This is a Hoffman school drawing that she did. You know, looking at objects, creating an abstract form. Look at that drawing. Oh, I should sit down. That's beautiful. Talk about mark making. And the variation in the type of ink she's using there to create almost a vibration of space. She loved Bonnard, Vuillard. So you see that reflected here. She was seeing in her own way, though. She was doing things here. Look at the line of trees going up on a triangle there. Back to another angled line there that goes into this wonderful sort of twisted tree on the right. How she opens the space. How she creates marks and lines and color. Really beautiful. This is one of her later paintings. And I did choose a lot of these because I know you're in the middle of all of this. How do you paint when you're in the middle of it? You know, and it's all sort of your visual, you can't, you know, how do you find something that allows your eye to open the space? You know, this is really beautiful looking at this. She's doing a thing, you know, almost creating a feeling of that X, you know, here, but then stopping our eye with that big bunch. And I love these changes in color here. You know, the complement and all of that green, beautiful thing. Sense of scale, the flowers down here, you know, opposed to the flowers up there. Just a slight sense of scale change can create a sense of space, let alone the color she's using. You know, with how she's allowing us to move. This is Emily Nelligan, who was I call them paintings. These are charcoal drawings that she did up on, she was a Cranberry artist, island artist. I think she, you know, she would only paint these or draw these really early morning or almost at dark. And she wouldn't work any other time. And she rarely drew any other place. She was there on the island working on these things. Up into her, she may have almost been 90, I guess. Going out there and seeing it, interpreting what she saw, being, you know, holding on to that beautiful inspiration. You know, the gray, even on that mass of trees there, is literally darker as it gets closer to the light. She didn't just use the same pressure the whole way across. You know, she's really pushing it. Gorgeous. You know, talk about. I think she and Lois Dodd have Lois is very different. But what I'm talking about is the spirit of where they are when they are painting and they're drawing. Emily definitely is the muse of that island. And I think Lois does that too. I think Stanley does that too. I remember one time Stanley saying, "Oh, it's just looking down my driveway." And it was this miraculous thing. Just this miraculous drawing. That's like saying, "Oh, she's just looking at the pool on Cranberry Island." But look what she's done. She's created something that's almost mystical. You're wondering why and what, you know? Beautiful. Oh, here we go. This is me. This is early Whistler. This is back in the 1980s for John David. And you can see me being influenced by some of my cronies and the people that I looked at. That looks like, you know, I shouldn't even say it out loud, because, you know, I hate to put them up with all those other artists. But I was influenced by Corot, you know, this tree mass here on the left, and the simplification maybe, you know, that I saw in some of those Kresch paintings. The air and atmosphere. This is back in the 80s also. You can see my Corot dots. I tried, you know, you do that as you're painting. You try these things, you know, you try them. They can be successful, but then use them as springboards and move on. You make them your own, you know, create something that people will say that's a Jay Noble painting, you know, they'll know it. Ooh, that's blurry. That's an ink wash drawing. I'll go past that. That's not blurry. That's walnut ink. for my friend Michael, who is into inks and things. That's looking at Cranberry Island. I love that place. That place has become a muse to me also. I go back to that place, 2-3 times a year. Always at the same times of year, because I love the light. I love the light for early spring, late fall. And I was talking about, I've started to go in January or February, and the sun, it's so far to the east and so northern that the sun is like from here, and it rises and it stays that high and it goes down. So you have like 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock light all day long. You've got those long, warm sort of things happening with the light. I've never been anywhere else that does that. Not for a whole day, but let's face it, the days are short too. It's dark at 4:30. But these are my drawings. I draw in my sketchbook often this way. And I do my drawings with ink wash. I just love it. And often with like a walnut oil and a dark India ink. It's looking out of an island called Baker Island. I'm honored Ruth Miller Forge owns this painting. She has this in her collection, drawing. And when I go places, like this is Italy, I go and I paint. That's how I see where I go when I travel. I will paint. I always take, I don't think I've been on a vacation since I was like 12 or 13 that I didn't have a paint box along. This is Italy, Tuscany. Yep, blurry, blurry. That's England. That's a studio painting, so that's a pure invention. That's a memory of where I was. My studio paintings are often inventions. I do a lot of plein air painting, but I don't like to copy the plein air paintings or try to make them again. I use them as a sort of a catalog of memory, and then I'll create a painting in the studio. It's just the way I work. It's not right or wrong. This is Cranberry Island. This is before breakfast one morning. I just love the paint. I like when the paint takes me somewhere. And if I have the guts to leave it alone sometimes, and not just scrape it off. Sometimes it's more beautiful when you scrape it off and work back into it. But that last mark sometimes can be really powerful. And I know some people say don't get romantic about that stuff. You should always be willing to destroy what is most beautiful in the painting to make the painting work, which I agree with. But I hope in the end, even if, now this is plein air also, this is a sunrise. Even in the end, in the studio paintings, I want the marks, oh, it's a shame. I want the marks to be like they were just put down. I think there's something marvelous about that. Painting at night, same place, different night, different color. I remember years ago, I used to go out painting with a crew. We called ourselves the Friday Friends. We'd go out, we'd go to breakfast, and we paint from 10 o'clock till like 2 o'clock. And one summer, it was so humid and so hazy. And I remember getting up one morning and looking out my window and thinking, oh no, not another silver gray day. And it forced me then to put the paintings out in my studio, and none of them were the same. They were all different. Even though in my head I was thinking, oh, not again. So take time to look at your own work. You know, sometimes I do it more when I'm painting. When I bring these things home, they go into a stack and I rarely look at them again. This is from the spring up on Cranberry. And that. Drawing, and these are monotypes, have really helped me open my painting in a way that I have wanted to do it for a long time. You know, the monotypes are a surprise. You know, you layer the ink on that piece of glass and you rub that piece of paper and you pull it up and you aren't sure exactly what it's gonna look like. But to me, this has really helped me with my own painting to do these. So these I do out in the field. I've got that little piece of glass with the chip in the corner. I love the chip in the corner. That sounds weird, but it is, I love the way it looks, what it does. And allowing the ground to show. This is on this beautiful old board. Prepared with rabbit skin glue, cut in half so it's soaked in. I don't like a slick surface, I like a surface that'll take it. But that was studio painting, so was this. Now this I thought would be interesting maybe for you. This is a series that I did when I went out at, whether was it like 6:30 or 7 o'clock. That's the first painting. This was taped to the back of that. That's the second painting. That's the third painting. So that's how I work when I'm outside. You know, I'm trying to capture that time. So I'm looking at it and painting relatively quickly. These are fields fairly close to the back of my house, close to my studio. And this is a fairly large sunset. This is actually, some of you were asking about Middle Creek. This is up at Middle Creek. And this is the last large painting that I'm working. Oh no, there's one more, I think. Since I came back from Maine, this is something that I'm doing in my studio. I'm not sure it's finished yet. But in this one also, this I think I'm done. I signed it, which I could always paint over that too, but this one I feel I'm finished with it. Okay, are there any questions?
Right, thank you, JD.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna do this move here. And then I'm going to bring the mic. If you have a question, I'll bring the mic. And if you could turn the lights up a little bit. And when you get the mic, just point it at your mouth like this. It may sound a little loud to you out there, but it's what we want.
So how big are the last couple of paintings?
The second to last one is. Oh, I can't do it, I guess. That's okay. The one is like 32 by 40 something. And the other one's almost square. It's like 32 by 34. Yeah. So those are, those get a little larger. I've done some bigger paintings outside, but for me, I don't have that rig you made, to have that big thing, and it's not as easy for me. I should do something like that, Thank you.
Thanks for being here. That was
Oh.
wonderful.
Thank you.
You mentioned you don't use your plein air paintings as source for studio paintings. Was there a time that you did, and if so, why did you stop, or what are your concerns about that?
Yeah,
for
I'll
you?
tell you what happened. When I tried that. In the middle of painting, I could feel my shoulders get tight. I was like, I'd get so tense trying to make that painting again. Instead of letting that painting inspire me to make a painting, I was trying to copy it. And now, go to the museums and copy the masters. But I can't copy my own painting. I just got so frustrated with it. I loved the marks and the color that were, reactions to what I was seeing. More than trying to make them again. I would rather have that distillation of memory and just put that aside and make a painting. Now actively, I'm sort of the same. I am moving back and forth, to look at the painting as I'm painting it. And I often think, the paintbrush is a long thing, so I'm often back here even when I'm painting, with my palette or the table palette, So I get that distance so I can react to the paint itself in the studio, if that makes sense.
And I'll just send a reminder to anybody on the internet, they can use the chat to ask questions. And Liam will find it for me.
Yeah, so this is from the chat, just a question about the whimsical female painter with blue figures.
Oh, yeah.
Mentioned from like.
And Hibachi.
And Bochnik. They were asking for the name, but I think they also had some interest in hearing a little more about her.
Yeah. Well, she used to come and visit us at Parsons in the studio. Sometimes she would be formal and want to look at your work and critique. Other times she loved to tell stories about her days. And I'll tell you, part of the magic of my graduate school at Parsons was that group of painters loved gathering together when they were young painters and talking about painting. And they used to, I remember Ressica taking us down to, the Cedar Tavern had been moved to University Place. There's a bar there that has the interior with all the names carved in. And he would take us there, he said, I'll buy your first round. He said, no, I'll sit here and talk about painting. And I think they missed that camaraderie that they had. And they all talked about that. Leland did, even Hallaker did, about gathering together. And Anne Tabachnik would often talk about those times, that you would gather together with other artists. Sometimes bouncing ideas off of each other, sometimes talking about what they saw in the museum, or some of the bad painting they saw in the galleries. They were honest, let me tell you. Especially Leland, there was no pulling punches about talking about art. Nothing wrong with that. We form our aesthetic and our ideas and opinions. And you move and paint where you're painting. You as an individual. But that doesn't mean you don't find a group of people. You find them here. You'll find them here. They're here, painting beside you. And you'll gather together and you'll talk about it. It's a marvelous thing to have that. You're lucky. You're lucky to be here. And these wonderful teachers that you have. Yeah.
Thank you for that talk. I was really happy to see all the images you shared, especially the ones of Leland Bell. And you mentioned that you have that portrait in your own collection. And I know you have an awesome collection of art, and I was wondering if there's anything in it that either currently is inspiring you or a favorite that you look back to for inspiration often.
Well, it's interesting. I look at almost all of them every day. I'll take, as I get up, those of you, some of you have been to my place. The bedroom is floor to ceiling. So those I see first. But I'll take a little walk around and look at them all. Look at them all. I told Stanley I see him every day. That's a marvelous thing. And to me, that and the paintings and the drawings are beautiful and they are inspiring. They really are. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. But when you have a connection to the person, that makes it so much richer. It really does.
Don't you have those portraits of Leland in your bedroom?
I
With your other
it's
teachers?
funny.
And they all look at you.
Leland's
wake
up there, Ressica's over there, and Halleck's over here. So they're all looking at me. I don't hear their voices so much anymore. I used to. But I know that they're there, and I appreciate who they were as painters and friends. Yeah. Any other questions?
I think that's
That's
our
it.
moment.
Good.
Good, thank you, thank
You're
you.
welcome.
All right, so we got, I guess I should stand here in the light. But we have another lecture coming up on Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. Barbara Grossen, my art mother. Even earlier, she wouldn't let the students out of class so they could get to dinner. I had to go down and stop the class. And she's like, what's more important, food or art? And then I'm just like, art, mom, come on, let them go get the Chinese food. So anyway, she's gonna be speaking at 10 a.m. on Wednesday morning here in the Hall of Philosophy. And that's gonna be a lot of fun. And then next Monday, I'll give you one more at 7:15 p.m. Ernie Sanaga is gonna be here. And that's it for now. Thanks for coming.